I joined forces with him, and here I am 6 years later, and I made a bigger difference than I ever thought possible. And it looks like my eco decade is not going to end on time. So anyway, with that, I'll dive into a little bit about what we're doing. Let's see, I want to do a slideshow from current slide. All right, can everybody see that?
Got it.
Okay, so you can tell me to go faster if you guys are already very familiar with this, but let me just, first of all, as I mentioned, Coltura is a nonprofit working to improve climate health and equity by accelerating the shift beyond gasoline to cleaner alternatives. And we do that by changing the culture of acceptability of gasoline and also using data to gain insights to drive smart policy. And so you guys, again, this is the one where it may be very, very familiar to you, but in the US, transportation is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And within that transportation sector, the vast majority of emissions are coming from our light duty vehicles, our cars, trucks, and SUVs. And those emissions are coming from burning gasoline. And so that's where we kind of get this idea that gasoline is kind of a major source of carbon emissions. It actually is 1/6 of total US carbon emissions. So if we can cut its use, we'll be doing something pretty big. So, you would think that with all these EVs on the roads now, and there's lots of people working from home after the pandemic, you'd think our gasoline consumption's probably going down at a pretty rapid clip, right? So this is gasoline consumption, over the decades, and you can see that apart from that tiny little blip during COVID, it really hasn't gone down. It's stayed flat. And scientists are saying that we need to cut emissions from all sources 50% by 2030 to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And you can see that this line is just not on track to reach that emissions cut. So we really need to figure out how to bend that line down. And so at Coltura, we focus on this kind of singular question of how can we cut gasoline use faster? So, electric vehicles are a fantastic way to cut gasoline use, and state and federal EV incentives are a powerful policy tool to get people into EVs. But there's a problem with current EV incentive policy. It's not really set up to maximize gasoline reduction. So let's just take an example. So of these 3 vehicles, which one do you think we should be incentivizing the most to switch to an EV? You can put your answer in the chat if you want, or you can just say it out loud. Anybody have a guess?
3.
Okay, we heard a 3. All right, thanks for participating in our game. All right, so what if we knew a little bit more about these vehicles? So I can tell you that number 1 is an Uber driver in a Prius. Number 2 is somebody who commutes 120 miles a day. And number 3 is somebody who leaves their car in the driveway and mostly uses it for tinkering. So now that you know a bit more information about these cars and their drivers, would that change your answer about which of these cars should we incentivize the most to switch to an EV?
Yes.
Yeah, so once we have the miles they're driving per year and the miles per gallon of the vehicle, we can tell how many gallons of gasoline they would avoid by switching to an EV. And now it becomes pretty clear that the Camry, the car number 2, really is the one that should be targeted for EV incentives and for switching from this gas car to an EV. But current EV incentive policy doesn't do this at all. It doesn't even look at gasoline consumption. It doesn't look at the data that we just saw in this example. There's just this assumption that all EVs are displacing an equal amount of gasoline or an average amount of gasoline. And as we saw from this example, that's really not true. There can be vast differences. And so our simple thought is, hey, what if we switch the biggest gasoline users to EVs first? And so we started looking for data on like, okay, well, who are they and how much gasoline are they using and where are they located? And we found that there's this enormous void of data around gasoline consumption. There's just nothing. So we started looking for data sets ourselves that we could gain some insights from. And we found something called the 2017 National Household Travel Survey. And we were able to get some information out of that. That formed the basis for our first gasoline superuser report in 2021. On the left is the cover of that report. And so one of the big findings that we got from this data was that in terms, if you divvy up all the drivers in the US in terms of their gasoline consumption, the top 10% of drivers, that red bar that you see on the right of your screen, are using nearly a third of all the gasoline, way more than any of the other deciles, and more than the bottom 60% of drivers combined. So there's a huge opportunity here to focus on that top 10% and get them to switch to EVs, because that would really make a big impact on gasoline. We also found that. Yep.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do we know how many miles those super users are driving per year?
Yeah, yes, I'm going to get to that. So
Okay.
actually, maybe just let me kind of get through this thing and think of you can type your questions in the chat if you want as I'm kind of going along, but I may answer them. So maybe we'll just hold them till then. Okay, so we also found that if you could get the biggest gasoline users to switch first, it takes a lot fewer total EVs on the road to achieve that 50% emissions cut that scientists are saying we need, from all sources. So if the biggest users switch first, that's the bar on the left, it'd be about 100 million EVs on US roads to cut emissions in half. But if the biggest gasoline users switch last, which they're kind of on track to do right now, it would take more than 2.5 times as many, or around 2.5 times as many to get to that 50% emissions cut. So there's a huge efficiency element to focusing on the biggest gasoline users for the switch to EVs. In 2021, when we put out this super user report, it got a lot of pickup. So these are just some of the headlines and articles that were about this, that were written about this idea. It's such a simple one, and yet it really got a lot of attention because it's new and it's not being done. And for the first time, people were thinking not just in terms of how many EVs can we get on the road, but rather like EVs in terms of how much gasoline each EV is displacing, depending on what its driver's doing with it. And that was totally new. So that was all great. We were off to a super start, but we needed to know more. We, again, still wanted to know, like, where are these gasoline super users? Who are they? And what is it going to take to switch them to EVs? And so we were very lucky. In California, we got tens of millions of vehicle records from the Department of Motor Vehicles. And they had odometer readings, they had the zip code where the car's registered, they had the make, year, and model of the vehicle. And we started with that data set, and then we added in a bunch of other data sets like census, gasoline prices, a giant California survey. And so we were able to create, with all that data, a very detailed map of where are these super users. So I'm going to try a fancy thing. Okay, so this is a screenshot of the map, but I'm going to actually try to take you into the map. Let's see if I can actually do that. Okay, I'm using untested skills here. So let's see, how would I do this? I'd have to go into maybe I think I have to open a new tab. All right, bear with me for just a second. Think of those questions, type them in the chat, and I will quickly go to our map and pray that this works. Okay, here we go. That wasn't too long. All right, so this is something that you can go to. It's at data.coltura.org. And so we have this gasoline consumption map. All right, and so this is the state of California, and the shapes right now are zip codes. And over on the right is the color code for now. It's the percent of super users. And again, we define those as the top 10% in terms of gasoline consumption. And so the darker the color, the higher the percent of super users in that county. So already you can kind of see, like in these coastal areas like LA area and San Francisco area, the colors are lighter, so there's fewer super users. And I'll just contrast that with the percent of vehicles that are battery electric vehicle, or who has the highest concentration of EVs. Okay, so remember this map for just a second. Now, when we go to BEVs, fascinatingly enough, the darker the color, the higher the concentration of EVs. And so the places where there's the most super users have the fewest EVs, and where there's the most EVs are the fewest super users. And so that's just wrong, right? Like we need to spread it, even everything out. All right, so it gets even better. We can go into the zip code level. So now I'm going to click on the zip code version of the map. And now I'm actually going to go back to % super users. Okay, so now every shape is a zip code. And so the darker the color of the zip code, the higher the % super users. So now we're getting a bit more granular. And now we can zoom in on the map. So let's just go like into Los Angeles. And so this is LA. And we do see a zip code here that looks different from the others, Compton. So we'll take a peek there. So we just click on it.
Hey Janelle, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't think we're seeing the same screen that you are. We're just still looking at the same map from the slide.
What? Oh
Yeah.
man.
Sorry.
Thanks for stopping me. Okay, I didn't realize I was taking you all over this place and you weren't even in it. Okay, let's try that again. Thank you. Thanks for calling that out. All right, now tell me what you see.
That's definitely
Got it.
different. Yep.
Oh, I'm so embarrassed. Okay, I'm gonna, to save time, I will let you guys play with the map yourselves, but I will show you this example from Compton. So just really quick. Okay, this is the zip code map. All the shapes are zip codes. The darker they are, the higher the % super users. Okay, so now we're in Compton, and we can look over to the left side on the view data, and we can see some demographics. Okay, so in this particular zip code, 10.9% of the drivers are super users. And we can see some demographics, kind of the racial makeup of the zip code. We can also look at gasoline usage. So you can see, for instance, that this zip code total uses 16 million gallons of gas a year. And so we can see as time goes on, are they going to be able to cut their gasoline use or not? We can see the growth in electric vehicles, which seems quite high, but the total number of electric vehicles in that whole zip code is still only 133, so that's not so many. And then we can see things like the information about the average age of the vehicles, the average miles per gallon, and vehicle miles traveled per year. And this answers one question. So in this zip code, super users on average do nearly 26,000 miles a year. Another pretty striking thing is that while the super users are only 10.9% of the people in this zip code, they're using 31% of all the gasoline. So that's a lot. All right, and as I tried to show you before, I'll do it now. This is the concentration of super users. Now I'm going to switch the color map, and that's the concentration of electric vehicles. Okay, so anyhow, now I'm going to go back and share with my other screen, and you're going to let me know if I didn't get it right, but I'm going to go back to the deck. All right, do you see the deck now?
Got it.
Yay, okay. Okay, so we did gain a lot of insights from this extremely granular data that were pretty exciting. So in California, we found out that gasoline super users are burning 28% of all the gasoline, and that's still more than the bottom 50% combined. We also saw that super users on average in California were driving 24,000 miles a year versus non-super users at 9,500 miles a year. And EV drivers were averaging 10,000 miles a year. We found that super users were burning on average 1,260 gallons of gas a year versus 354 gallons for non-super users. And we found that super user vehicles, let's see, 53% were pickup trucks and large SUVs, and 39% were cars, like sedans, like hatchbacks, crossovers, that sort of thing. We also found that in California, and I know I'm telling you all this stuff about California because that's where we have all the data, but I hope you're thinking in your mind like, oh, it would be interesting to know this for Colorado, because I'm going to share a surprise with you in a minute. Okay, so in California, if we can get the biggest gasoline users to switch first, based on the California Energy Commission's forecast of how many total EVs will be on the road by 2030. So forecasting that 5.4 million EVs will be on the road in California based on the regulations we have in place. We have this gas car phase out, et cetera. So if that's true, if those 5.4 million are the biggest gasoline users, we will be cutting gasoline use by 43% by 2030. But if the lowest gasoline users are switching first, we'll actually increase our gasoline use by 2%. On the equity side, we found that the majority of super users in California are below the median household income. That's the orange part of the pie right there. And we looked a lot at share of household income spent on gasoline. And we found across all income brackets that super users were spending a much bigger share of their household income on gasoline than non-super users, but that the difference was really striking in the lower income brackets. So the red bars here are super users and the yellows are non-super users. And if you look in the area of like the less than $25,000 and $25,000 to $50,000, you can see that the red bar is way higher than the yellow bar. These poor super users making less than $25,000 are spending more than 30% of household income on gasoline. And we wanted to better understand super users' kind of lived experience. So we interviewed a bunch of them. And here's just some of the ones, some quotes from a few of them. So a couple things really stood out from these interviews. One was these super users' extreme dependence on gasoline to navigate their lives. And the other was the kind of stress and difficulty that paying for all that gasoline was causing them. So, switching these folks into EVs would really help them out, both financially, and it would make a big climate impact. But you might be thinking, well, we always hear EVs aren't affordable. These people couldn't possibly afford to get an EV. And the thing is, if you're a super user, you actually might be able to afford an EV pretty well. And the reason is that on average, super users are spending $500 a month on gasoline and $300 a month on maintenance and repairs. And so if you compare that, if you trade in your gas car, we actually in our report, we did some comparisons, but this is one of a super user who is trading in their 2017 Chevy Trax, which is a gas car, for a new Chevy Bolt electric vehicle. And if you can see the green kind of bottom line, if they trade in that car, they're actually going to start saving, spending less per month with the electric vehicle than they would have by continuing to drive their gas vehicle. So that's a pretty impactful thing. And just like so many people don't realize that super users have this unique situation where they're already coming up with an enormous amount of monthly cash flow. So that's kind of the affordability question. But then we also thought, well, shoot, these super users drive a lot. Could they actually drive an electric car and still meet their driving needs? Like, how would that even work? And are there some that are better suited to switch than others? And so again, we kind of looked at some insights from the map. And here I have a screenshot of one part of the map, a zip code called Los Banos, California. In this zip code, 20% of drivers are super users, and half of that 20%, or 3,600 drivers, are driving cars, not trucks, not SUVs, but cars. And that's important because there's already a lot of electric models of these types of cars already available. So it would be the size that they're already driving. The zip code is 80 miles from the city of San Jose, and the income's fairly low. And so that suggests that these super users may well be living where housing is much more affordable and driving that 80 miles each way to San Jose for their work. Well, that's okay, because almost every electric vehicle out today can do that 160 miles round trip without even having to stop and charge. So there's not any kind of inconvenience there. And then most of the homes here are in this zip code are single family homes, which means that they are probably good candidates for installing EV charging. And so that means they would gain the convenience of charging overnight at home and the lowest electricity prices. And so the kind of putting this all together, there's possibly 3,600 super users who could switch to EVs without any big technical barriers, just in this one zip code. And so with this map, we can look at all the zip codes and figure out, like, if a government were to target various zip codes for marketing, EV incentives, EV outreach, like, it would be a lot easier to target market zip codes like this, where there's a big number of folks who could probably switch. So that was kind of the super user report. And so what we're doing next is taking this data and making sure that it is actionable. So we're looking for government, we're pushing for governments to establish goals and metrics. Currently, they're all around numbers of EVs. You'll see like, oh, California wants 5 million EVs on the road by 2030. But as you saw from that example of the different cars, like which EVs they are really makes a difference. And so we want the metrics and the goals to be around gasoline reduction, not just number of EVs. We want to change the conversation. So we want the public to also be thinking about gasoline consumption and how do we cut gasoline use faster. We want to grow the support base for EV policies and EVs. So rural people who live in rural areas, 2 to 1 are super users. They're twice as likely to be super users. And so we want to really help them out by finding policies that will get them, help them get EVs and grow the base of support for EVs and EV policies through these rural folks who traditionally have not been big fans of EVs. And then we want to reform EV policies, again, to incentivize super users to switch to EVs as much as possible. So in California, we're already working on that. We introduced a bill, and that's me testifying on that bill just a few weeks ago. Anyway, this bill would provide a new EV incentive for lower income super users. So it would both hit the climate, it would kind of maximize the climate impact of the dollars spent on EV incentives, and it would maximize the equity impact by starting with the lower income super users who are probably suffering the most. You saw that chart of having to spend so much of their household income on gasoline. That bill passed its first 2 committees with unanimous support, which means that every Republican voted for this bill. And in this highly partisan, very divisive time that we're in, it was kind of amazing to see that Republicans supported this. And I think they could see that their landscapers, their contractors, their folks who just have to drive a long way could really benefit from this sort of thing. We also have a bill in Washington that appropriated or called for a study of super users with a view towards changing Washington state's EV incentives. And in Vermont, there's a bill that we backed that would allow a utility to spend money to focus on super users, switching super users to EVs. So that's all about California. But the cool thing is, so we have this data team that really, worked hard to get the California data together, and they love this stuff. They're just super into it. And they said they would probably have a US map by, the end of this year or something like that. But then they surprised us last week, and they actually have already created the US map, at least a beta version, 8 months ahead of schedule. So I'm very happy to tell you that while this is still in beta and it's not for public consumption yet, Colorado may well be, we may have data available for Colorado very soon. So that's about it. I will stop sharing and take questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Janelle. That was great. Super interesting, and it really definitely makes you